Question 1, why is the specific content of delusions largely ignored in treatment?
It really matters. How do you respond to a grandiose delusion versus a paranoid delusion?
How can family members and care partners find and maintain hope? Every now and again, you get a victory, and it's really important to wait for those victories so that you can keep going.
And you'll never know when you have a small victory what the ripple effect is.
I'm trying to use the LEAP method and I'm struggling. Can you give me a scenario or some examples of how you answer that question when the answer that I'd really like to say is no, I don't believe that it's safe for you to leave jail?
If I were you, I wouldn't take medicine either. He's like, what? Like, well, what you're telling me is you're not sick. The medicine gives you side effects. You don't need it. So if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't take it either. And then I was in a much stronger position to share my opinion.
Hello to everyone, and I wanted to welcome you back and thank you for being part of our first episode of Ask Dr. Amador, episode of SMI Spotlight. We're really excited to be able to make this kind of service available to people. We have received a number of questions that have come in both over our phone lines and by email, and then also even a couple comments that were posted on the YouTube channel. Before we get going, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows that if you want to submit a question, it is okay if you want to be just anonymous in the question. We did have a couple of those this time around, and I want to make sure that people know that it's all right to submit something. You don't need to use your name. And because we didn't actually ask people whether or not they wanted to have their names used, I'm just going to be using first names and initials for today. But when you do write in or call in and leave a question, just let us know how you want to be referred to, and we'll respect your wishes on that. I'm going to start with our first question. This message is from Karen. Question 1 is, why is the specific content of delusions largely ignored in treatment? How and in what way does the specific content of delusions affect outcomes?
Well, first I want to agree with Karen. In my experience, I've worked on 5 different psychiatric inpatient units and 2 ERs, emergency departments, and we don't do a lot of specific education about how do you respond to a grandiose delusion versus a delusion of jealousy. So the person has a delusion that their spouse is cheating on them, or a paranoid delusion. And it really matters. So for example, in the context of paranoid or persecutory delusions, if your family member has included you in that, for example, that the person has a delusion that the CIA is monitoring them and stalking them, and that they're being targeted in negative ways, and then the delusion starts to incorporate you, the family member, there are really specific skills you want to implement. And the first one is not to have a knee-jerk, understandable reaction like, how can you say that? I would never do that to you, because that just pushes the person away and makes them typically very angry. What you can do if somebody has a paranoid delusion that involves you is listen to it, just to be actively curious about it. And I know that sounds weird, but remember, this is the illness talking, not your loved one. This is, quite literally, I believe, chemical chaos in the brain producing these ideas. So if somebody accuses me, for example, of poisoning them, I would reflect it back. So what you're saying is that I've been poisoning you. Did I get that right? Yeah, you got it right. And then if the person says, are you admitting it? Of course I say, no, I'm not admitting it. I'm really sorry. I don't see how I'm doing that. But listening actively, absorbing what your loved one is saying to you is really valuable, because, creating either recovering or creating a relationship where the person feels they can talk to you about their reality builds a bridge to them and puts you in a better position to help them accept treatment.
Do you have any tips for family members to kind of try to remove the, feelings that come with being accused of something, which I can tell you, I've been there where like somebody had a delusion that was like involved me, and your reaction initially is to be angry or hurt or defensive.
Right. I do have a tip for that. And I've used it a lot, and the feedback I'm getting is that it's pretty helpful. Imagine if your loved one had Alzheimer's and they forgot your name, right? Would you feel hurt and dismissed or insulted? No, because you understand it's a symptom of the brain disorder. Lisa, you and I have known each other for years, and if suddenly you didn't know my name or you started calling me Steven, a different name, I might get a little bit irritated, right? I have a feeling about it. But if it's coming from Alzheimer's, I'm going to be compassionate. I'm not going to have a negative reaction. So just try to separate the illness from the person. And the way I think about it in those instances that we're talking about, it's the illness making the accusation. It's not your loved one.
Do you have any thoughts on, if there are any delusions that are, kind of more of a cause for concern that might tip you off that there might be a worry about the person's safety? And I'm thinking particularly of a family member that I, had done some work with advocacy wise, who her son had a Capgras delusion that she was, had been replaced with a robot. And she was very worried that he was going to try to harm her. And I have that there is some evidence about that, but I wonder, does it matter? If they have one delusion versus another delusion, does that tell you anything about what you might need to be on guard for?
On the face of it, it doesn't tell you much about whether there's danger. But if you're curious about it, and you were talking about Capgras syndrome, where the person's been replaced, right? If you're curious about it and can engage with your loved one about it, then you can start to explore whether or not there's any risk of any kind of violence. So, what I heard you say is that I've been replaced. How does that make you feel talking to me? And if your loved one comes back with, well, I want to effing kill you, you're getting important information. If your loved one comes back with, well, I'll talk to you, but I know you're not my mom, you're in a safer place. So being curious is really important, and not what we were talking about a minute ago. If you can work on not taking it personally and just want to explore it with them.
That certainly does make sense, that the more information that you can gather, the more likely you are to be prepared for whatever it is that you need to be prepared for. So I think that is very good advice. And Karen, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to us with anything else that you want us to cover on that topic, and we'll be happy to bring it up again. I'm going to move on to question 2. So this is from an anonymous listener. And the question is, how do you stop the revolving door of lack of access to care, medication, leading to hospitalization, incarceration, and homelessness? How do you solve the lack of beds problem and the lack of comprehensive care problem?
If I had my magic wand, we're joking because you and I are immersed in trying to change this situation. The system is in many ways broken. And the lack of beds and the revolving door and not holding people when they do represent a danger or are decompensating and their life is unraveling, not keeping them and treating them. My first thought, and it may sound like I'm, a bit self-serving, is get involved with TAC, with the Treatment Advocacy Center, which has for decades now been working on increasing the number of hospital beds, making access to treatment more available. So do advocacy work. And that, oftentimes for people who have been through difficult family situations like this, putting some of your energy into changing the system, I find is really healing and really, really powerful. With respect to your loved one, okay, there's not enough beds. The system is not responding in the way we'd like it to, and it really should ethically. I recommend a lot of different things. If your loved one has been hospitalized and the hospital is trying to, ship them out after 72 hours, engage with the hospital. Send letters and ask letters to be put in the medical records. HIPAA does not keep you from communicating to your loved one's treatment team. So if they say, we can't talk to you, respond, I understand that. May I please have the fax number to the nurse's station? Or hand deliver a letter. What should be in those notes? The things you're concerned about that are relevant to keeping the person longer in the hospital and treating them adequately. Because 72 hours, 1 week is typically not, 2 weeks, typically not adequate. So if your loved one has talked about suicide, put that in a letter. I have vital information to share about John Doe, your loved one's name. As recently as last Tuesday, he was talking about wanting to end his life. And he has a history of this, and just do a short little bulleted letter that you fax or hand deliver to whoever you can have contact with, and ask that it goes into the medical record. That triggers a response. Like I said earlier, I've worked on a number of inpatient units. And when we have a document, in the medical record from a family member saying this patient of ours has, as recently as, a day ago or 2 days ago, been talking about ending their life or harming someone, that's another tool that we use to make the the somewhat broken system work better. The other thing is to talk with your loved one about staying out of the hospital and partnering with them and coming up with some common ground about how they can stay out of the hospital. I would need more specifics from Anonymous to give more specific advice, and maybe he or she will write back to us about their situation in a little bit more detail. But there are ways to have conversations that can help break the revolving door cycle that this listener is writing about.
I'll jump in and add as an advocate that, sometimes the work that we're doing just feels like a vast ocean of change that needs to be made for us to even get to the point where things make any sense. But,
Right.
I just encourage people to remember that every single discrete change that you make in our system does something good for
Mm-hmm.
someone. And, sometimes it's, if you're just feeling really overwhelmed, sometimes it's helpful just to kind of narrow it down and realize that this thing that I did made a difference today for one person, and that person matters and it's worth doing. And, I've seen some really major leaps forward. They're rare, but you also
Mm-hmm.
see like little steps forward. And if you make enough little steps, you do get
Yeah.
somewhere. So it's definitely something you can tell from the way that the question is phrase that this is a person who's been fighting with the system for a while. So don't
Right.
lose hope. Every now and again, you get a victory, and it's really important to wait for those victories so that you can keep going.
And you'll never know when you have a small victory what the ripple effect is, whose minds you've changed, whose sensitivities to the problem you've increased.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, and honestly, on the individual level, I can tell you that, with my sibling, we had a lot of failed efforts, and it only took one success for her to turn
Mm-hmm.
things around. And you might wait a long time for it, but it does happen. It
Mm-hmm.
does happen. So, sometimes you can try the exact same thing twice, and the first time it didn't work, and the second time it did.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll move
Yeah.
on to
We're
our next
trying.
question, which I think is a nice next one for considering, because I think they're very related. The question is from RP. How can family members and care partners find and maintain hope? Is there a roadmap for finding and maintaining hope when you're faced with so many societal challenges and stigma?
Seek out, read, listen to stories of recovery and success, and look at the research. And there's a lot of myths. So, for example, that schizophrenia is a deteriorating illness and it just gets worse over time. That's not what the research shows. So, get educated, ask questions, ask us questions. We'll be happy to answer them. But the other thing is seek out stories of recovery. So there's the one story in particular that comes to mind of Eric Smith that People magazine actually, I think he was partly on the cover, and very, very severe case of schizophrenia, homeless, criminal justice system encounters, and has had a robust, wonderful recovery and is doing incredibly well. And I actually do some work with Eric. Matt Rutan, there's been no articles written about him, but I just met with him this morning. This is somebody who has schizophrenia, was homeless, arrested multiple times, in the state hospital for 6 months. His parents were at their wits' end. And Matt now for 7 years has been taking medication reliably, sees a psychotherapist, works in a clubhouse, handles their finances for them. So he has a volunteer job where he's helping other people with lived experience. And if you knew what Matt was like when you hear his story, and I'm hoping to have him on one of our episodes of the podcast, it just gives you hope. So seek out those stories.
I know Eric is a hero for so many of our families because, it's just, when you're really struggling, you just want to know that there's some opportunity that you might have in the future. And this is why, one of the reasons why I share my sister's story, even though I tend to be kind of a private person. It was 15 years of just struggle with my sister. And there are doctors that said that she was the sickest person that they'd ever seen.
Yeah.
And she wasn't, like she could go through periods where she seemed fairly normal, which is obviously sometimes even harder for people to get care. So I just think it's important for people to know that, people have said that about my sister, that she was the sickest person they'd ever seen, and she is doing fine. I am so proud of her. And it was a lot of work, and she still has a lot of trauma that she has to deal with, but she is here, and she has really made a lot of progress, and she's doing as well as she could possibly be doing. And if she can do it, then I really hope people have hope. And, and I want to, I also want to be sensitive and recognize that there are a lot of people who have lost loved ones where obviously the system did not work for their loved ones.
Right.
But I hope that they can take something away from the fact that what we're working on, what they're working for, and what we're all working on together is something that could bring some healing to families that are in the same situation. If I think anybody who's ever been in the situation that I've been in, that some of those parents have been in, if they can prevent this kind of suffering for someone in the future, they will do that. And they recognize that might be the gift that they're able to give.
Every story of recovery that gives me hope, where people have gone from just the deepest, darkest places to a meaningful life in recovery, takes time. And so as we're talking about this, I just want to say this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It may take years, but it's worth it. And I have probably hundreds of stories that I could share of people who the family, and at first blush, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this person's never going to get help. This person's never going to recover. And then they do. And it takes a year. It takes 2 years. It takes 6 months sometimes. It takes 5 years sometimes. But I have tremendous amount of hope for the overwhelming majority of people I work with.
All right. Well, I'll move on to the next question is from Donna, and it's on the subject of aging care partners. How help and protect children after parents and care partners have passed away or are unable to provide care any longer. And I can tell you how often this comes up.
Weekly, I hear it with the families I'm working with. This comes up again and again and again. What's going to happen when we're gone? There's a couple of different things that I recommend and that I've worked with families toward. One is, if you have something you can leave financially, set up a special needs trust, talk to an estate attorney, and be very collaborative with your loved one if you can, and with the treatment team. What will he or she need 5, 10, 15 years down the road? So if you have something you can leave, do that. The other thing is, if your son or daughter has siblings that maybe have not been engaged, try and engage them. Try to help them see that their brother or sister has not been. I hear it sometimes, he's just an asshole. No, his illness makes him look that way, but that's not really what's going on. Help siblings to heal and get more engaged. And one of the things that helps a lot is teaching them about symptoms, about anosognosia, that lack of insight, because a lot of siblings get disengaged and angry because they just feel like their siblings should just, wake up, smell the coffee, get help. And they don't understand that there's another brain disorder symptom that keeps them from doing that.
Yeah.
So engage the siblings.
I think that's a really good point, because I know that, I think I have definitely seen a lot of examples of parents who try to shield their other children from what's going on. And it's, I understand the impulse, but it's also, what I say to my mom is that, I will outlive you. And my sister is in my life, so we need to make our reality reflect what reality really is going to be, and
Right.
that's just the way. I always think that, like, one of the things that you can do to relieve your stress about it is to plan for the real reality, do
Yeah.
everything you can to know what happens at what interval. Definitely, talk to attorneys. There are a lot of attorneys who specialize in
And
exactly this kind of
yeah.
area, who can give you a lot of, I mean, there are tools out there, financial tools, there are planning tools. And it's important to know how this all works, because it's definitely something, I think as our parents are aging, um, you find out that there's a lot of stuff that you need to know about how to
Mhm.
plan for end of
Yeah.
life care. And that's especially true for somebody that has a disability, somebody with severe mental illness.
One of the things to be mindful of is if your son or daughter who's, living with and struggling with mental illness is living at home with you, to make a priority finding a way for them to live independent of you with supports. For me. That's one of the things that comes up the most with aging parents. He lives at home with us. What's going to happen when we're gone? And that's one of the things we work on a lot in our work together. Is let's get that first step started.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's really good advice for, especially for aging parents who are worried about this, is, like, you want to start, kind of pushing for as much independence as you can, as early as you can, so that the
Yeah.
the person knows how to access the system. They have a sense of what needs to keep going into the future. I mean, and it's complicated. I mean, it's hard even with your parents being able to help you, or your sibling being able to help you, or having, a representative payee. Like, it's already hard to
Mhm.
navigate that stuff. So you have to try to help a person be on that path to independence, and to know where to find support as soon as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really important first step towards long-term planning.
Yeah, I mean, and our society does not make it very easy. I mean, like, we're not set up very well to help people without a disability age
Right.
into their senior years. So it does take a lot, but sometimes having that commitment that you're gonna, like, really focus on that aspect, give you something. It'll give you something to hang on to and something to focus on when the fear is bubbling up.
Mhm.
So I'm gonna move on to our last question, which is from Christine. I try to use the LEAP method. My son is currently in jail, and I'm struggling to use it and to see how to use LEAP techniques with him in this situation. He only asks or wants to talk about whether I'll bail him out. I'm trying to use the LEAP method and I'm struggling. Can you give me a scenario or some examples of how you answer that question in a way that's consistent with LEAP principles, when the answer that I'd really like to say is, no, I don't believe that it's safe for you to leave jail? I'd really
Right.
appreciate some ideas or some talking points to help with the situation.
First and foremost, if he can get bail and be released, but you don't feel it's safe, that you don't feel it's the right thing, then it becomes a very interpersonal issue where you need to communicate that to him. And I'm sure you probably already have. And the way to do it is, if he's not in treatment, is to ask him to accept treatment. And at that point, if you feel it's safe at that point, we're going to be able to post bail. And then that can start an argument, right? Where your son gets really angry and says, "Well, I don't need treatment. I don't belong here. Don't you love me? Why aren't you doing this?" And if you stick to the boundary, but with kind of softness and kindness and apology, like, "I'm really sorry, but Dad and I need this. Maybe we're too nervous. Maybe we've got the problem. Nevertheless, this is what we need. We need you to accept treatment for us to be comfortable posting bail." And don't get, pulled into the whole, "I'm not sick." Yes, you are. You have a problem. Don't get pulled into that argument. Just keep it focused on the thing that your son is asking for. "I want bail." Another situation I'm thinking of, somebody who I helped, who the judge wasn't going to even post bail, allow bail in his case unless he was in treatment, and he spent 4 years in jail, and could not get a bail hearing because he was not competent. And it's a terrible revolving door in the criminal justice system when that happens. And in my conversations with him, met with him weekly. He was adamant that he would never accept treatment. He didn't have schizophrenia. There was nothing wrong with him. And it took us about 6 months, but his lawyer and I together, by listening to him, listening to his complaints, not dismissing them. Of course, you don't want to be in treatment. Given what you're telling us, why in the world would you accept treatment? Then he would say, well, what do you think I should do? Well, we're really sorry because we know how strongly, your truth is you don't need treatment. We just know that if you accept treatment, the judge can very likely allow bail to occur. And we know that your parents are willing to pay it. So, we're sorry, but that's your situation. He accepted treatment, got out on bail. It took 6 months, but he was adamant. No way I'm going to accept treatment. Absolutely no way in the world. There's nothing wrong with me. And he was willing to do the time. And he literally said that. I've been in here 4 years. I'm willing to do the time. But by listening to him, normalizing his experience, I said things to him like, if I were you, I wouldn't take medicine either. He's like, what? Like, well, what you're telling me is you're not sick. The medicine gives you side effects. You don't need it. So if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't take it either. He felt heard. He felt respected and validated by me. And then I was in a much stronger position to share my opinion. Okay. And I said, if you want to get out, which he did, this is what the judge wants to see. And not just any medication, a long-acting injectable, which he was adamantly never going to take an injection, which he ultimately did. So by that, first listening, respecting, not judging, being empathic, dialogue, from there you can give your opinion and have a lot more influence over the behavior, over the decision making. And he got out on bail.
So out of curiosity, if you feel like you're getting stuck in the same conversation over and over and over again with a loved one, where they want you to post bail, you're saying that you don't want to. You've explained that, like, I understand where you're coming from. I need you to do this. You can think I'm wrong. Blah blah blah. How often should you have the same conversation?
Whenever your loved one is willing to listen. So when if Christine's son is angry and agitated and yelling, this is not the time to try to make any points. This is not the time to use logic and say, well, when you have not been in treatment, this, that, and the other thing happened. That's how you ended up in jail. All those logical explanations typically fall short. When he's in a calmer moment, what you say is, what's the blah, blah, blah part? The blah, blah, blah part is, we're so sorry we feel this way, and maybe we're wrong. This is what we need. Accept treatment, stay in treatment. We will then, post the bail for you. It's, it takes time. This is not a single conversation, almost never a single conversation. In the story I was telling, it took 6 months. But hopefully, and I have other stories where it just took a few conversations. But you've got to start with absorbing your loved one's experience. And by absorbing, I mean really letting them know you've heard them and being empathic and appreciative. One of the things I say to people like this is, you really have strong values. And you're, in this case, I said, you're a man of conviction. You will never take medication because you're not ill and the system has been against you. That's what he said. You're somebody, I admire your conviction, and I genuinely do, even though it's coming from a symptom. I genuinely did that. And when I did that, he started to really trust me and care about my opinion. And my opinion was just practically speaking, we can get you out of jail if you accept these injections of medication. That's the situation you're in. I'm sorry you're in that situation. As a parent, if my son was in that situation, I'd say the same thing. I would simply apologize for it, though. I'm sorry, we need this. Maybe we're crazy. Maybe we're too anxious. We're really sorry we need this. We need you to accept treatment before we're going to be comfortable.
How do you handle the conversations with a loved one before they're kind of ready to have a calm conversation, when it's just screaming?
Help them de-escalate, help them to stop screaming. And the tried and true method doing that, I mean, we teach law enforcement this, and they love it because they're encountering mentally ill people, out on the street or, in a 7-Eleven or in their home, screaming and paranoid and angry. And the number one tool is active reflective listening. Tell me what's going on. So, your problem is that what your parents uh, are pedophiles and they've abused you. I'm just thinking of a particular family I'm working with. Must be really upsetting. You've got to listen and acknowledge and validate the person's experience. Validate doesn't mean agree that what they believe happened. Validate means I appreciate what you're saying and how angry you are makes a lot of sense, given what you're saying. That calms people down typically. And a part of it for the family member is also back to what we were talking about earlier, is to help them not get defensive, angry, and to manage their fear so that they can have this conversation. Because when you're a family member, it's real different than if I'm a police officer encountering somebody who's escalated and angry and throwing things. We have to really get ourselves in the zone of this is the illness screaming at me.
Oh, I
This is
mean, and
not.
I have to tell you, I have been there so many times where, like my temper is just flares because I
Yeah,
mean, like there is nobody like your family members that know how to push your buttons.
yeah,
So I mean,
yeah,
they know all the things going all the way back to the beginning. So it really can be very hard to keep in mind
yeah,
these, there is a reason this is happening and it isn't personal.
yeah. And it's really hard to hold on to that and believe that it's not personal, because it sure sounds personal,
Yeah.
but it's not. And one of the tricks, one of the things I often ask families to do, and I'll ask them to show me a picture. Show me a picture of your daughter before she became ill. Was she like this then? Was she saying these kind of horrible things to you that she's saying now back then when this picture was taken? And, the families tear up and say, no, she was never like that. It's like, remember, this is the illness talking to you, not the young woman whose picture you're showing me.
Yeah. I mean, that and the dementia exercise that you mentioned is very applicable. I mean, it is, you would not be, I mean, even if you have a knee jerk reaction initially, like you are able to fairly quickly remember this is a
Yeah,
symptom. This is not who this person is. It is a symptom they are experiencing.
he hasn't
It's
forgotten me.
hard because you have to keep in mind, you have to keep reminding yourself over and over again. But I think that is the key.
Yeah, and what you're saying is really important. It's repetition. It's an exercise. It's a mantra. I mean, I actually call it a mantra. This is the illness talking, not my loved one. This is the illness talking, not my mantra. I teach people that,
Yeah.
to before you start a conversation, even if the person's really agitated and angry and talking a mile a minute and in your face, this is the illness, not my loved one. And it's we can change ourselves more easily than we can change other people. But when we change ourselves, oftentimes other people are willing to change with
And I
us.
and I will say this to family members who might be listening and maybe can remember instances when you might have slipped and yelled back. Don't
Yeah.
expect perfection from yourselves. Everybody slips up. It happens. And
Yeah.
you just like get back in there, go at it again.
I don't talk much about one of my sons has schizophrenia. And we got into an argument about a side effect that doesn't exist. And I got angry with him. I said, I don't know why you're saying this. It doesn't, and I teach all this stuff I'm talking about. And I totally forgot to practice what I teach because I was hooked. And I just had, how could you say that I would do that to you, that I would give you medication that would cause this horrible problem? I didn't do that. And that's not a real problem. And it just went to hell in a handbasket, that conversation. And we were in the car. And by the time we pulled into the driveway, I remember that what I was doing is just completely 100% opposite of what I believe in and what I teach. I just lost my temper. So I apologized. I said, I'm really sorry. Tell me again what I did to you, even though I don't think I did anything. And he described this side effect. It does not exist. And I said, I can see why you're so angry with me. And we got out of the car and he put his arm around me. He says, it's okay, Dad. I know you just love me. I use this phrase, I love you imperfectly. That's how I love all the people I love in my life. It's imperfect.
Well, I think that was really excellent advice. And I think, and hopefully that was helpful, Christine. So if you have any follow-ups or if there's anything further that you want to ask about the situation, about like talking to somebody who is in jail and wants to be bailed out, or somebody where, they just kind of have a single issue that they're focused on and how to make that work with LEAP, I hope you'll write back and let us know if you've got any follow-ups.
And please, everybody who asks questions, please, after listening to this, let me know, let us know if it was helpful.
Well, I want to thank you, Dr. Amador, for answering this first round of questions from our listeners. And for our audience, please be looking for our next episode, which is, we're not quite on our exact schedule yet, but we're putting them out as quickly as we're able to put them out. So if you are interested between now and the next one to have a question answered by Dr. Amador, I'll just ask you to please contact us by voicemail or by email. Our voicemail number that you can call is 703-294-6005, and you can just leave a voicemail, and please let us know how you'd like us to refer to you. If you want first name, if you want to be known as anonymous, or if you want initials, etc. We'll do whatever is preferred.